But if you need to switch things around, if you need to sub out a different exercise because you're not feeling well, if you need to walk instead of run, like all of this is okay. And you'll still be able to run the race. You'll still be able to do the marathon. For me, it was a lot of all or none thinking. Like, if I don't do this 6 miles, I won't be able to get to the finish line of this race. And it's just not true.
Welcome, everyone, to this week's episode of Roots of Healing. And this is the podcast where we're diving into the different pathways that clinicians have taken that promote health and wellness and their internal journey. And I'm your host, Dr. Siri Chand Khalsa. This week, I'm delighted to welcome Dr. Michelle Quirk. She's a board-certified pediatrician and certified run coach with the Roadrunners Club of America, which I have a very unique connection to. In a moment, we'll dive into that. She founded Mindful Marathon to help make running easy and fun for busy professionals. Using an informed, enjoyable, and effective approach, she coaches her athletes to a lifelong love of running. And I am just so delighted to welcome you. Thank you for coming to the podcast.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me on. This is really a joy to finally get to connect.
Absolutely. We were lamenting before we started recording that we have so much in common and we've shared so many connections online, particularly around these principles of lifestyle. One thing I would love to hear a little bit about is, how do you find yourself here as a pediatrician? And tell us a little bit about your educational journey and where you're working now and the evolution of this really interesting pathway you've created for yourself.
Yeah. I think the story is interesting. And if you had told me even 10 years ago that this is where I would be today, I would have thought that was crazy. I was not always a runner. I think that's important to say. And I got into running sort of off and on, like as a med student and a resident. But I found myself after residency in my first clinical job in inpatient pediatrics. At the time, so that was 2012, I recognize now that I was most definitely burned out, but I don't think we were really talking about burnout back then. And so I found myself really giving advice to a patient and his family in the middle of the emergency department at like 1 a.m. about lifestyle, about good nutrition and getting enough exercise and sleep schedule and all of these things. And I just had a moment where I was standing there thinking, like, I'm not doing any of these things myself. And I don't know, it was just a wake-up call. I don't know why it was that particular early morning hour, but I decided after that something needed to change, and I really wanted to run, but I always found it quite difficult, and I never stuck with it for longer than a couple of weeks at a time. So yeah, after I got home from that shift, I dusted off my sneakers in the closet and I went around the block, and I just decided, you know what, 5 minutes is enough, and I will walk if I have to, but we'll do 5 minutes. And that is how running started, maybe 12, 13 years ago. And yeah, I wove my way through. I was an inpatient pediatrician for about 8 years. And then I, again, found myself, I think I've had periods of burnout through all of this. And really it was, I will say, the death of my dad. So my dad passed from lung cancer at a pretty young age. He was 64, otherwise very, very healthy. But after he passed, I really felt quite lost, and I poured myself into work. I'm sure that a lot of people out there can relate. I poured myself into work and into running. And I think it took me a long time, a lot of miles spent with myself to kind of find my way. I'm still finding my way, I guess, but to find my way in clinical pediatrics. And so fast forward, I switched to outpatient pediatric care about 4 years ago. And that's where I am now. And I'm now working part-time. So I'm a part-time pediatrician. And then I grew this run coaching business that started about 5 years ago. So I have sort of a hybrid thing going on.
Wow, that's really fascinating. And I love how you've woven really your own healing journey. Interestingly, that's the theme of the podcast, right? The roots, both, metaphorically and literally the road that we've walked to get to where we are now. And my background I have many years in hospice care, and so I'm uniquely attuned to some of those deep existential questions that can come up when we lose someone we love, and how everyone handles that differently. And there's really no one right way to process the loss of someone super meaningful. I lost my dad in 2018, really young. He had unrecognized aortic endocarditis.
Oh,
Like,
wow. Oh, I'm
what
sorry to hear that. Yeah. Oh,
right?
geez.
Like,
Yeah. Yeah.
young, and then he was septic, and then he was gone, right? So, but
Hmm.
he was a runner. And so there's an interesting thread here that's emerging. And of course, we may both have some cracking voice and strong emotions talking about our beloved fathers. I miss him tremendously. And I had an interesting other pathway. I developed a really severe pain syndrome after he died, like an occipital neuralgia. And so, suffice it to say, those big feelings that we have in grief or burnout or loss of identity as we're shifting through our careers and relationships, marriages, and so on, we really have different ways that we can work with and move the body, move the spirit, move the emotions. And some people, unfortunately, might turn to other things that help them be less aware, be less present in addictive substances or even scrolling online. We were talking a little bit about that before we started. I'm curious, in your current work environment, being a pediatrician, tell us a little bit about how your colleagues perceive what you're up to, and what has that been like to try to explain that you have this hybrid practice model? And then we're going to dive right into what is a mindful running coach? Or you could start with that if you prefer.
Well, we could go with the colleagues. I think when I started Mindful Marathon, I was still working inpatient, and it was very hard to really. I wanted a set schedule. That was something that I was very important to me, to be able to coach the athletes and have sort of a set schedule of coaching days. I mean, it sounds very simple, but if you're a hospitalist out there or you work shift work, you know that it's sort of all over the place and changes from week to week and month to month. And so changing to outpatient care was really huge from a scheduling piece, just to be able to have a little bit more control over planning your life. And that was something that I hadn't appreciated for so long. I think as a med student and a resident, and then just sort of kept going into that shift work. So the schedule piece was huge. And I think at the beginning of the business, I was afraid to tell people. And not that I hid it, but I certainly didn't talk about it at work. The conversations were mostly like in the lunchroom or when I was getting a cup of tea in the morning. As an aside, like, by the way, I'm doing this thing. And so now, we're 5 years in, I'm much more comfortable talking about it. And I would say probably the majority of my colleagues know that I'm a run coach and I love to run, and that I also love Bruce Springsteen, side note. But yes, I don't hide any of those things. And I had one of my colleagues and friends became a client this past year, and we ran the Broad Street 10 miler together in Philly here. It's one of our big, very fun races. So I think that it just takes time. So if you're out there and you have, these other sort of, I don't know, maybe it seems like you're on the fringe in medicine, and like, what is she doing over there? I don't understand her. And that's okay, right? They don't have to get it, but I think that they can see that I am a much happier and more fulfilled pediatrician when I am in the office, and I'm much better able to take care of my patients and connect with my families. And having this part-time schedule, I have the recovery time from both running and then also from the job, because that was something that was missing for a long time. And I really had no appreciation of that at the beginning. And it took months and months of being out of that inpatient setting and having all of this newfound time and this better schedule to really realize how tired I was, like how fatigued I was and how stressed. And yeah, I wasn't enjoying the job. And I love kids, right? Most pediatricians do. We like hanging around children. And I was finding that I was just lacking a lot of joy in the office. And so those are red flags for me now, when I'm starting to feel like, okay, it's been a rough week. We have to really pay attention to recovery and alone time and all of those things that fill your cup, whatever that is. So I think that, the colleagues don't necessarily have to understand it or get it, but I think they respect it. And I think that over time, it will only continue to grow. And I always encourage everyone out there, right? Like, you sort of lead by example, and people can see. They see what you're doing, and they might not agree with it, but I'm always encouraging people to find their thing, whatever that is. And maybe that's in academic medicine, maybe it's not.
I think that's so fascinating to recognize. And I love this point you brought forward around recovery. And in my own journey, studying integrative therapies and lifestyle therapies, we don't often hear this notion of recovery. And I'm going to go back to the last time I did shift work. And I knew graduating a resident in 2005, so it's been a minute, in internal medicine. And I was at a really formal training place. I was at the Mayo Clinic in Jacksonville. And so we had rigorous pre-work hour kind of scenario. I was the last year without work hours as an intern. And then we picked up the slack as second and third years. But that's another podcast. But we would do these long overnight shifts, and then you'd have these very long days afterwards. And my recovery was eat what tasted, what felt like reward. Let me reward myself with food that's going to just feel good in my mouth. And then I'm going to reward myself by just sitting and zoning out, watching TV. And I think that when we think about a clinician wellness or clinician-based recovery process, it's interesting that there's no really strong culture of what post-call can look like or post-overnight shift. And we know that circadian rhythm regulation turns out to be this incredibly impotent modifier for epigenetic mechanisms and cancer risk and many other things, inflammatory. So I love that you, along the way, started to modify your relationship to what recovery really needed to be. Can you talk a little more about that? Because we haven't talked about that on the podcast yet. And recovery is something we're still skirting the podcast, the mindful running program, but we're going to weave these themes in. But recovery
we'll get back there.
is so interesting to me because it isn't something, we're in this go, go, go culture, right? So this notion of self-care, people often think, well, I'll spend a half day at the spa, or I'll get my nails done, or I'm going to take time out at this vacation. But truly, at least in my framework, and I'd love to hear yours, recovery is actually a daily commitment to periods of exertion and periods of rest, just like a heartbeat, expansion and contraction.
Yeah, I think I'm still learning and still trying to figure out the best way in the day-to-day to weave the rest and recovery piece. But I will take it back to running and give this example because I think it illustrates what we're talking about. I ran my first marathon in 2018. And when I was training for that, it was something that I thought that I would never do. And I had a lot of doubts that I would be able to do it, even though I had kind of worked my way up in the distances over the years. And I took this stepwise approach and I had a coach and but I was still working those shifts. And the same mentality that I had about work and the go, 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 I took with me into running. And so if my schedule said, 6 miles, whatever day it was, it didn't matter if I was post night shift or if I was exhausted, I was going to get the 6 miles done. And thankfully I didn't get injured, but I think that I can see now looking back that, I was very lucky not to get injured doing what I was doing because things were sore, things were hurting, I was exhausted, I wasn't fueling properly. It was just sort of like, get it done, mark it off the spreadsheet and move on because that is the medical system and our training. And that's what my brain was used to. So I took that into the thing that was supposed to be giving me, peace of mind. And of course I loved running on the trail and I would get all of these wonderful things out of it. But sometimes it felt like a chore because it was on the schedule. And I didn't want running to end up, being compared to my job. And it felt like a job training for that first marathon. Right. So I think Now that was a while ago. Now I'm a little bit more flexible. I'm still learning flexibility with myself, but this is something that I try to pass on to my runners too, that, we have this training plan, and in an ideal world, the runs happen on these days. But if you need to switch things around, if you need to sub out a different exercise because you're not feeling well, if you need to walk instead of run, like all of this is okay. And you'll still be able to run the race. You'll still be able to do the marathon. For me, it was a lot of all or none thinking. Like, if I don't do this 6 miles, I won't be able to get to the finish line of this race. And it's just not true. So having that flexibility is a part of the rest and recovery process too. But you're right. I think it's an everyday, it's something to look at every day and within your week and within your calendar. And while I love a good massage and a spa day, it's almost like you come out of that and you're just thrust back into everything. And so you have to figure it out for the day to day, because we can't take a spa day every week.
Yeah. Now, I think I saw it. Did you grow up as an athlete? Were you athletic, or were you really more of a book or study kind of oriented person? Tell us a little bit about, like, what was that? As you were talking, I had this almost vision of the Greek god Nike, right? Like putting on his first shoes. And it was like this Marvel moment where, there was electricity coming off and suddenly you were running. I know I'm being the hyperbole here, but what was that moment like? You dusted the shoes off and put them on. Was it just something inside you that was like, you can do this? Mm-hmm. Or what was the question you were asking yourself as you started?
Yeah, I think I was definitely not much of an athlete. Growing up, I was a dancer. I did like ballet and tap and that kind of thing. But I would never have considered myself an athlete. And I used to look at the cross country team running at high school. I had some friends on the team, and I just thought, like, they are made of different genetics than I am. Like, I just am horrible at this. And I think that if I had a coach maybe, or I had, I don't know, a teacher who knew that I was interested in running, they could have given me some pointers to get started, instead of my mentality, which was, I'll just try to run as fast as I can. And then I would huff and puff and feel awful and then end up, back in my dance class or on the couch. So right. I was definitely not much of an athlete. But yeah, that image of a goddess with the flames coming off of the sneakers, that's something to strive for. But yeah, I think
it's this image of that moment.
But yeah, when I came home from that shift and I dusted off the sneakers, I felt very determined. And I just thought, you know what, you've gone about this maybe several times in the past, but that doesn't mean you can't try it again in a different way. And I think having the grace with myself to say, you don't have to go out and run 3 miles today, and you don't have to run as fast as you can today. Like, just go around the block and see how that feels, and starting slow. That was it's like a key mindset shift for me. It sounds so simple, but yeah, that's what worked. And then I just kept going out there because it felt good.
Yes. I mean, that's pretty amazing. Now tell us a little bit about, there's always the initial part that's our journey. And I just wanted to circle back really quickly in so much as that learning how to sell our side projects can actually be a really big arc. And I want to come back to that. But we always start kind of in our own process. I do a lot of business coaching now. And the reason I do that is because I had a product I had to market and I was awful at it. And so because I'm a little off the beaten track too, one could say. And so what was that moment from running to saying, maybe I can help others with this? Was it a coaching experience you had, or what was it that kind of sparked your interest in saying, could this also be something that I provide as a service or support to others?
So it's a combination of things, but it is a coaching experience, although I didn't realize that's what it was at the moment. I was lucky enough at the time, for those out there listening, I worked at the same hospital as Dr. Ali Nowitzki. She's a local here. And one day, I think it was probably on Facebook, I saw I saw like a picture of her and her husband, and it was an advertisement for something, one of their very early programs that they did together. And I was like, what is this? What is Allie doing? And at that point I had known her from the hospital, and we would meet up in bad situations like codes and things like that in the ER, you know? And so we decided to go out for coffee or tea, whatever it was, a brunch, because I wanted to find out more about this and what she was doing. And at that point I had run the marathon, and I was coaching like some family members and some friends. My idea of coaching them was writing them a training plan and, you know, talking with them on the phone to figure out how they're going to run this race. So I go out for brunch with Allie, and she was listening to me talk about the schedule and all of these things. And I was, thinking about a shift in medicine. And she said, I could coach you on the job and things like that, but for a half hour, you have been talking about how much you love running, and you're coaching your husband and your mom and your cousin and your friends, and you're coaching with Girls on the Run. Like, have you thought about this as a business? And yeah, I was just silent. Like, I sat back and I was like, no.
Not me.
No, it had not crossed my mind at all. Yeah. And I had a vision of like, wow, you're on the treadmill, not looking around at all. And that was what started it. So I took the certification program with the Roadrunners after that, because I think many of the physicians listening, you feel like you need a certification, even though I was already doing this stuff, and you can read all the books, but you want to have this certificate. So I took that course, and then I launched Mindful Marathon after I was officially certified. But yeah, what a shift though, and also a different set of skills to be an entrepreneur and to build a business. Just much different than the other skill set to become a physician.
Oh, it's so radically different. Tell us a little bit about what was in that coaching program. What kind of skills did you learn?
Okay, I would say not a lot in terms of like building a business with the Roadrunners Club. It was more about how to write a training plan and how to get into all of the different ways to structure a training plan for all types of runners. So your beginner runner, intermediate, advanced. Someone, trying to run their first 5K is a different athlete than someone who's trying to qualify for the Boston Marathon. So it was very helpful in that sense. But it was almost like this one viewpoint of like, okay, this is what you'll do, but like, how do you market yourself and build the business? For that, I am in Dr. Una's program, the EntreMD Business School. I joined that program in 2020. So I'm like one of I think I was in the second cohort, like the OGs, but really I credit her with a lot of the business skills, because I had no idea what I was doing at the beginning. And I muddled through it for about a year before I joined her program, but I really had no idea. And like looking at, at the numbers and trying to put yourself out there, whatever that is, video, podcasts, blogs, writing, all of these things, like that was way out of my wheelhouse. And as an introvert, it was, and still is, very uncomfortable. Like talking to you one-on-one is perfectly great, but talking in a room full of people is I still get tachycardia. So
I hear you. I was doing a recorded presentation and I was like, I'm not even talking to anyone, but my heart was just pounding. So I'm really curious. Have you, and again, we're not trying to do a grand rounds here or anything, but what has been something that's really sparked your excitement about writing from about running from a research standpoint? Like, has there been any particular studies or information? Again, no need to feel like you have to recall a study or a situation, but your impression, because oftentimes when we start a new habit, suddenly we see the article in, the dentist's office, and then we see the thing on CNN, and then a friend sends us a podcast about the marvelous benefits of exercise. But I'm curious, is there one or two that have really stood out to you, both if you want to share personally, but just more broadly, what has more than the walk of the dog in the morning, what has that done for people?
Yeah, I think there's probably two things. When I meet new people who find out that I'm a runner, usually they say like, oh, I could never do that. It's bad for your knees. And the orthopedic research does not suggest that. I could point to, there's a number of studies looking at that, and maybe we can, I don't know, I should actually, that's a great idea to make a list of them and put them out there. But really, people who are overweight and have other issues, but sitting on the couch will definitely hurt your knees more than running will. But it's so funny because that is like the most common thing that non-runners say to me, like, oh, I don't want to do that. It'll hurt my knees.
What a misperception. Wow.
Yeah. That's the one. And then, the other is really probably research on all of the wonderful effects that an easy running routine has. Even running, let's just say 3 times a week for 30 minutes in a session at your easy pace still will lower your blood pressure. It will lower your resting heart rate. You'll sleep better. Like all of these wonderful lifestyle changes in not a very big dose. So you don't need to go and run a marathon. That's always also, people are like, oh, you ran a marathon. I could never do that. But even, like walking the dog is great. But if you could, if you can extend those 10 minutes and make it 30 minutes, if you could quicken the pace, if you can do a run walk program, like all of those things are still really helpful for all of these health benefits. And I've coached runners who come off of medications. Like that's always a huge celebration. Like coming off of blood pressure or cholesterol medicine, like it takes time, but I think once you start the routine and after a couple of weeks in it, once you feel how you are, that's why people stick with it and keep coming back to it.
Yeah, there's so many places to segue from what you just said. But firstly, I just want to reiterate, we're probably doing more harm by sitting and not moving than any conceived impact to the joints. And that's an important consideration, of course, as an internist and someone who took care of a lot of aging and elderly patients. I'm not allowed to say old anymore, my mom said. Forgive me, everyone. But aging, elderly, advanced age, however we want to phrase it, that sedentary lifestyle turns out to be this potent predictor for not just sleep or restorative things, but the metabolic concerns, probably cancer concerns.
Yeah.
And it's a core pillar in the lifestyle medicine recommendations of the 6 is to have, vigorous movement. What do you consider the threshold? This is more probably just a subjective question. What do you think is the threshold between moving as a walk, which has its own benefit, and progressing into actually having an exercise program? Now, I guess we could put walking into that, and I don't want to negate the value of walking, but what is that gray area and threshold where you're seeing increased heart rate and the other physiologic impacts from really exerting ourselves more? What do you think that threshold is?
Yeah, I have a lot of walkers, and my mom is a very brisk walker, and and my mother-in-law as well. We did a half marathon together. I somehow convinced them, this was a while ago, almost 10 years ago, to do a half marathon. And they mostly walked the whole thing, but very briskly. So I think if you have the ability to follow your heart rate, so I have a Garmin watch. A lot of people have your Apple Watch, fitness watches will show you what your heart rate is while you're doing the activity. So I think trying to figure out what that heart rate elevation is to get it into your aerobic zone. So for me, if I walk, it's really hard to get it like into that zone 2 if we're talking about the aerobic zones. Like zone 1 is still better than sitting on the couch, but I think you'll get more benefit if you go into a zone 2, which is sort of our, like in running, it's our easy pace. If you're cycling, that's like a nice easy paced long ride. You can get there swimming, like you can get there with all of these different activities, and you don't, like I said, you don't have to go out there and huff and puff and do it as fast as you can, but faster than walking your dog. And so maybe taking a look at either talking with your doctor or your coach or whoever it is, and looking up maybe what that zone is for your age, your height, your weight, and figuring out what that heart rate threshold is. Like I think looking at the heart rate can be something somewhat simple if you have a watch to figure out if you're really in the aerobic zone.
That's such an important point, right? And oftentimes I come back to this and I'm curious about any initiatives you've thought about as a pediatrician. Now, I was a soccer player, so my parents had a very strong emphasis on movement and sports, and I actually have injuries from that. Let's not, we digress. So playing soccer is a very different animal than running. I also ran track. I definitely know there's a big difference. I have really bad injuries from soccer. I was a forward and I was always tackled. And I'm sure you see these injuries coming through your primary care office, this bedraggled, also effervescent teenager who's like, I got this. And they've got, a knee this big and they're like, put me in, coach. But going back to kind of what you were saying, I'm really curious about so I was a child of the 70s and 80s, and no one ever sat me down and said, here's a good gait style. Here's a way to think about your body. Here's how you can interpret. Obviously, we had no wearable device.
Mm-hmm.
Have you thought about what would be the core curricula or core information you'd like every young or budding athlete for whom running is part of their athletic journey, or even those who maybe don't think they're athletic? Have you given some thought to what you would want to tell a pediatric, not too much, not too, like Mama Bear, right? The three bears, not too little, not too much. But I'm curious because no one ever taught me anything about running philosophic frameworks, training mindsets. I just went kind of like you did on your first run. And in every training camp I was ever in, they were like, we're going to run you till you pass out. And you're like,
yep,
passing out, coach, it's your, leaning back, the lights out. So I wonder if through this journey, you have this adult world you're working in and coaching, but has your mind been percolating what you would want kids to know?
Yeah, definitely. I think I'll give a shout out to two programs. Like the Girls on the Run program is really great. They have a program for boys that's called Stride. And I worked with that program a little bit as a coach, an assistant coach, for a couple of seasons. And I think it's not so technical with the kids, but each lesson had maybe a little bit about running and a little bit about preparation. They were training over 10 weeks for a 5K. But it was more about how we talk about our bodies, nutrition, all of these other aspects that I think are important, especially for the non-athletes out there. But I had the same experience as you did, where running was like in gym class, it would be like, okay, we're going to do the mile run. And I would always be coming in like mostly last or second to last, huffing and puffing my way in. But no one took me aside to say, hey, maybe you should slow down a little bit. It seems obvious, but yeah, or maybe you could walk a little bit and still get there. But the other program, it's a local program here, but the Students Run Philly Style is a wonderful organization here in the city, and they primarily middle school and high school students to run longer distance races. So we have, I alluded to the Broad Street 10 miler, we have the Philly Half Marathon, the Philly Full Marathon, but they, I would say most of the students who are in that program are not athletes. They're not runners. They're like me and you. And if a program like that had existed when I was that age, I wonder if I would have taken up running sooner. But it's just it's gentler, and maybe it takes a little bit longer to reach the goal, but you're training for these longer distance races that most kids, I don't think, especially on the track team. Like when I tell them, when they say they're a runner and they're on the track team, they're like, oh, what's your favorite distance? And I say the half marathon. They're like, what? That's like, too far. That's so long. And I say, yes, but I like to run long and slow. You like short and very fast.
Isn't that the truth?
Yeah.
Tell us about your first marathon. Tell us. And I wanted to segue before we do that. For the listeners, if you're in a region that doesn't have a program, maybe you can start one, right? They aren't,
Yes.
there are frameworks from these larger organizations, and there may even be things locally that you don't know about that are initiatives, public health initiatives centered around movement and running. So, but anyway, I want to segue into give us all the details of your first marathon. Did you get new shoes? Did you have a running outfit? What was your drink? Or did you just be like, I'm doing it? And, cut out all the accoutrements, all of the side stories.
No, I gave it a lot of thought. It took me a long time to commit to the marathon. I had a lot of doubts about being able to do it. So I love Disney. I love Mickey. And the first half marathon I did was in Disney with my mom and my mother-in-law. And at the end of that was 2016. And at the end of that race, I remember we were at the hotel and we were waiting for the bus to go back to the airport. And it was the day after the half marathon, which is the full marathon day. And I was watching these runners come back from the race. And I mean, it was the gamut of reactions that you can imagine, like just elation, fatigue, curse words, there was a lot. And I was looking at these people and it really just started as a question. Like, I wonder if I could do that someday. I think, over the next year, the pull got a little bit stronger. And so I signed up for it. And yeah, so I think part of it was the excitement of being in a place that I love to be in. I call the marathon the ultimate park hopper because you go through all 4 parks. And and I was there with my friends and my family to cheer me on. So all of those things were really helpful. A lot of people get dressed up for the Disney races. Like, people go full out sparkly costumes. I wore my shirt from the half marathon. Nothing too exciting, but exciting for me because it was all things that got me to that moment. But I remember being at the start line and being like a little bit scared, which I think is normal. That, we have 26 miles ahead and we're not sure how we're doing it. And I think throughout the race, I felt great. The weather was nice and cool for once in Florida. It wasn't humid. It was like the perfect racing conditions. And I stuck to my pace and my nutrition plan. And yeah, I remember, I think at mile 25, it was like mile 25 where I thought, I think I am actually doing this. Like, before that, there was still a question, like, you might not finish. But after I crossed mile 25, I was like, all right, I could walk the last mile and still get there. But yeah, I mean, I was just, absolutely elated when I crossed that finish line. I mean, yeah, if I look back at the pictures, I still get a little bit teary.
Oh, that's so amazing. So I grew up in Washington, D.C., and my dad was part of the Roadrunners Club probably in the 70s. Like, it's early. I remember the running magazine, Roadrunner magazine, coming with all the shoes and Saucony or, New Balance. We were always like we weren't the Nike family, that's for sure. And when my dad really got into running more deeply, which he was around my age when all this was happening, so late 40s, early 50s, he started doing the Marine Corps Marathon. And he probably ran it 13 times. And
oh, wow.
Every weekend he would go to the races and get the T-shirts. So I just wanted to circle back and say all those T-shirts were like something that we so equated with him, and like the Peachtree 10K, which was this big lottery, and it has the best T-shirts, and he never qualified for Boston, all of these sort of personal goals that he had in the midst of his running. And again, small aside, but as he got older, we unfortunately on his side of the family have probably LP(a) aberrations because it's just very young age onset of cardiovascular disease. And when he had his aortic valve disease, prior to that, he'd already had a heart cath, and they said, now he had been asymptomatic, but this is just anecdotal, but they had said, wow, you have about a 97.8% blockage of your LAD, which is the big left ventricle supplying artery, for those of you not in medicine. And then the cardiologist, and my family might be like, that's not true. And I'm like, no, Dad told me this. The cardiologist said that he had all this collateral vascularization from his exercise that had probably saved his life because the heart had grown to not be dependent on this pretty severely blocked artery. And ultimately, I think that his marathons were his deepest introspective time, and his running partners were his best friends. And somewhere, sorry, this is a slightly more somber conversation here, but somewhere along the way, his best friend, who was a runner, passed away of an acute heart attack at a young age. And I don't think he was overtraining. I think these are just people who may have just had an intuitive relationship to, it's essential. It's not a choice that I'm moving every day. But when I think about that and your topic, which I want to get into a little bit here, and I want to be always mindful of our time. So I wanted to leave enough space for us to talk about bringing mindfulness to exercise. But I know for my dad, it was essential. These were deep introspective. He was sort of an agnostic person, but he was deeply spiritual in his explorations as he ran. And me and my brother, we would go cheer him on at the Washington Monument and the Smithsonian's, and we'd hop on the metro and hustle between stops, and he'd be baked in sweat when he's done, and you'd get the Mylar blanket. Like, I mean, just talking about this, all these wonderful memories are flooding me in a good way. And so I'm curious about, at what point did you recognize, okay, I have this clinical background, which of course informs everything subtly. I had this personal journey. Then I was so excited about it, I started telling other people. Then I realized it could be a business. But I think along the way, something deeper, even still from those sort of important stages began to evolve, which is this inner exploration of mindfulness. So tell me, I'm really curious, how did that come to pass? Was it also like an epiphany in a moment, or tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, I think I have to blame the marathon training for that, because it's a lot of time by yourself on the trail. And I always preferred being outside to running on a treadmill. I really will only do it in, lightning and when it's icy on the roads. The temperature doesn't bother me. It's, 8 degrees here and I'll go outside, but I won't go on the ice. But I love being outside. And I think somewhere in the training for the marathon, I'll just describe it and say I zoned out so much that when I finally looked down at the watch, I had realized that I had gone like 4 or 5 miles, and I had no idea that much time had passed. I don't really know what I was thinking about. Maybe I was thinking about nothing. But I think that was like this huge moment for me. Like, my mind went totally blank, and I loved how I felt and couldn't believe that all that time had passed. And I think, like, over time, I realized at first when I was running, I used to run with music before then. And I think training for the marathon, I really let go of running with the headphones. And maybe it was one day that I forgot them. I can't quite remember, but I didn't have them, and then just went and did my thing. And so sometimes I think about a lot, but it's also creative time for me. So I come up with a lot of ideas for my own running and for my athletes, and creative things for the business, and I don't know, all sorts of creative time. And otherwise I'm not really, I wouldn't say I'm an artist at all. And I don't find myself feeling creative except when I am in the run. So that's creative time when I'm thinking, and then sometimes I think about nothing, but that is like a very heavy reset for me. Sometimes I usually run in the morning, much more of a morning runner, but every once in a while, for example, like after a day at work on a Saturday, I got home and I told my husband, like, okay, no talking. I have to get out there before the sun sets. And I'm going now. Like, it was that kind of day that I felt like I needed it, and I didn't get out there in the morning. And so I think it is like the way that your dad probably craved that time. I also crave that time. And I haven't found, I would say that the closest activity I've found that I can kind of drop into that with the mind going blank is swimming. So running and now maybe swimming. But I know that happens for people who are avid cyclists as well, and other exercise. So it's not just running that can give you this. But yeah, I think it's tapping into nature and tapping into yourself and how the activity is feeling in your body, and just tuning out everything else. So no music, and even if you're running with someone, maybe no talking.
Yeah. This is such a beautiful aspect of mindfulness, right? Just allowing the mind to settle. And then sometimes this wonderful effervescent information emerges, and sometimes there's some destructive thoughts that need sorting out. It's like being in a garden. It can be this whole array of experiences. And I think it's so beautiful how you've brought that awareness of what can come from that into the coaching that you're offering. Or, inadvertently, one could say, like, we're going to train well, and guess what else what's going to happen with that. And that's really exciting for people. So if someone was, say, I'm going to give a possible scenario, and of course we have a medical disclaimer that we're not providing any medical advice or coaching advice. We're merely talking about a possible scenario. Let's say you had someone who, like me, so you're not coaching. Let's just use me as an example. I've been struggling with some long COVID issues and cardiopulmonary issues, and I'm mostly slowly to the other side of it. It's been almost, way too long, almost 5 years now. And so I'm curious, and I'm cleared from a cardiopulmonary standpoint. There's not any sort of lingering issue holding me back other than just the mental process of what my lungs have been through. What is a way that you encourage people who have been at sort of maybe been athletic, had really healthy bodies, and had some life-altering period in their life, but cancer and injury and illness, where they want to kind of get back to it, and it just feels really mentally intimidating? What are some ways that you bring the coaching model into that kind of scenario?
Yeah, I think this has come up numerous times in the past, either with people who were maybe competitive runners or competitive athletes in high school and college. And then, life happens, families, kids, illnesses, deaths in the family, like life happens. And there's this feeling like you can never get back to that person. And so I think there's some coaching around letting go of expectations a little bit and realizing that this can be a new journey and it can be a separate chapter from whatever it was in the past. And it doesn't have to be that way. Not everyone has to be a very fast runner or qualify for the Boston Marathon. And, I've struggled with that too. I'm a relatively slow runner compared to other runners out there. And for a while, I thought, what business do I have being a coach because I'm not very fast? And in fact, now most of my clients are way faster than I am. And it turns out it doesn't really matter, right? Like you can be a coach and you don't even have to be doing the activity. But that was news to me. So I think, step one, managing expectations a little bit. And then step two is really for any newer runner or someone who hasn't been out there for a long time. We just start very slow. So start low, go slow. And I teach, it's a simple level of effort scale. And if you're familiar, like with the pain scale, 1 to 10. And so 1 would be like a brisk walk, faster than walking the dog, but like a brisk walk. And 10 would be huffing and puffing, a bear is chasing you. And so I try to have people start in the 2 to 3 out of 10 range, which means if we were jogging together, we could maybe not as comfortably as we're talking now, but we could talk to each other and not be huffing and puffing and have our heart rate, through the roof, red in the face and all of that. So I try to get people to find, we just call it easy pace, conversation pace, and try to let go of whatever the number is For a lot of my athletes or former athletes and people who are very attached to numbers, sometimes that means going without any technology, that's hard to do. But sometimes you just have to leave it at home and just go and feel it. And we put the numbers back in later once we're ready. But I think starting low, going slow. I started with 5 minutes around the block. 5 minutes is not nothing, and it's not on the couch. And so give yourself a lot of time. It doesn't have to be overnight. And like we're talking right after the new year. And so I know, it's a time of New Year's resolutions and intentions and all of these wonderful things, but it doesn't have to happen overnight. And it usually doesn't. And that's okay.
It's so true, isn't it? Like nothing good comes from, snap of a finger. It's that cultivated relationship. And do you find a lot of the runners and your athletes are creating programs that they hope to have for their whole life? It's not always just for a training period.
Yeah. The interesting thing is that a lot of athletes who I started working with in 2019 and 2020, maybe at that time they were working toward getting back into a routine or toward a 5K. And now they have gone on and run, half marathons, ultra marathons. Like it's really interesting, the evolution. And so I work with a lot. My primary one-on-one clients now are mostly repeat clients, which is like the best thing in the world because it's people I have known and they're friends now over the past 5 years, where we started with one goal and it has evolved. And some people are not training for a race, but they're training for life.
Yeah, that's so true.
Yeah. So you don't have to have a race on the calendar either. But yeah, goals have evolved over the years. So you never know where it's going to go. If you start and you're thinking you just want to get back out there and get a routine, and then all of these things emerge.
It sounds like it's really mindfully created, meaning you, like on a trail run, you come to a divergence and you ask yourself a series of questions. How much time do I have? How much do I want to exert? What did I eat yesterday? How's the other health things that I may have? What I'm wondering is, you had mentioned a beginner, intermediate, and advanced. As we're winding down, tell us a little bit about just a framework so the listener can understand frameworks around running approaches.
Yeah. For a beginner, I would say this would be someone who hasn't run in a while or hasn't run at all. Maybe you have a regular walk routine, or maybe you have a Peloton bike and you're doing that, but you want to start running. So that would be sort of my beginner runner. Intermediate might be someone who's been running for a while. We'll say at least 6 months, maybe a year, has a good base. So we talk about a base training. Base training can be anywhere from 3 to 4 months of like continuous running. So what I mean by that is maybe at least 3 times a week for 3 or 4 months at easy pace. You have a good base under you. And so if you say, hey, Michelle, I want to run this half marathon in 3 or 4 months from now, you have a great base to be able to start ramping up the mileage for that particular race. So that would be someone who's more in the intermediate range because you have an established base already, whereas my beginner runners don't. And then an advanced runner would be someone who has a lot of speed goals potentially. Maybe you've run a marathon or 5 in your life, and you have goals of certain times, maybe a Boston qualifying time, which is very fast marathon time. But that would be my advanced runner. So, yeah.
So there's really interesting ways of approaching training based on skill set, personal capacity, goals, and that can be something that kind of expands and contracts. In some phases of life, you're all in a training program, and then you might have a child or a sick parent, and you realize like work, sick parent equals less training time, right? We have to be in that constant, and it's a moment to moment kind of internal exploration, I would imagine, just like running is, right? That momentum and movement forward. Well, I'm curious, we had talked a little bit before we started chatting. And thank you for that overview. That's really helpful. Excuse me. Oh, goodness. So we had talked a little bit about this kind of plant forward focus. Can you share, do you have a smoothie you love or a recovery shake you love, or what is a meal you do before you run? Like, my dad always used to be like, take me to Spaghetti Factory or whatever, Olive Garden and carb load me. I don't even know if that's the prevailing mindset anymore, but I'm curious, that man could put away some spaghetti, and he loved to eat. So that was the thing. He used to say he ran so he could eat. And so people have different motivating factors for sure.
Yeah, we love to eat in our house as well. I joke that I feel like our groceries look like I'm buying for a family of 4, but it's just me and my husband. But we definitely love to eat. I usually before I run, I often don't eat anything because it's first thing in the morning. If I do, it might be like half of a banana or maybe graham crackers, actually. For a while, I was not onto graham crackers because I ate them so much as a medical student and a resident. But now I have learned to enjoy graham crackers again. So sometimes I will just put a little bit in the belly and go. For fueling within the run, most of us probably don't need to fuel within the run unless you're going to be out there for more than 75 or 90 minutes, because we have enough sugar and carbs in our bloodstream to last us about 90 minutes without taking anything extra. So I usually just run with some water, but if we're running a marathon, we have to have a whole fuel plan. So we can talk about that on another podcast. But
yeah, that
within the
would
run,
be a fun one. Yeah, it's a whole thing. It's a whole thing. I would love
it's a
that.
whole thing. Yes.
Yeah.
But yeah. And then after the run, I do love a smoothie. It's a little tough in winter because it's so cold. But I do love making a smoothie, and I keep a bunch of frozen fruits on hand. So if you have extra bananas, don't throw them out, freeze them, take them out of the peel and throw them in a plastic bag and freeze them. I like one that has banana, blueberry, mango, and then I usually put in a handful of spinach. Fun fact, you can, if you don't like spinach or you have kids who don't like to eat greens, you can hide the spinach in a smoothie very well. And the blueberries make it blue, so even when you put in a ton of spinach, it looks blue. And so anyway, I share this with my patients too to try to get in more fruits and vegetables. And then you can use whatever base, if you don't want to put cow milk, I have used almond, oat, soy. The Ripple milk is pea, made from pea, and that has a pretty good protein content because after you kind of want a good amount of protein in there. So yes, I use that. What else goes in? Sometimes some peanut butter. But yeah, I have a recipe for that if you're interested. Happy to share.
Yeah, we'll share it when we share the podcast. A link to your
it's
blog
delicious.
or website. And tell us a couple of questions here as we're wrapping up. What has been your favorite place to run?
Oh boy. Can I pick 2?
Yes. We don't have set rules here.
Okay. We did a half marathon in Monterey, California. Beautiful. Whales were off the coast.
Is this
it was
Beach, the golf course, or yeah.
Yeah, it was it's in the town, the city of Monterey, but it goes along, it's like an out and back along the coastline, which yes. And some people are like, oh, an out and back. But no, it's beautiful. I wanted to keep going out and back. So that was really lovely. And we visited Hawaii a couple of years ago, and we ran a 10K in Maui, and it was so hot, and I was going so slow, but it was beautiful. So it didn't matter. Yeah, both of those. Oh my goodness, beautiful.
And have you had a favorite race? Was it the Disney Marathon, or what's a race you might recommend to people to think about doing?
Oh, these are so hard. Yeah, the Disney races are a lot of fun. They're really, really fun. And the marathon, actually the marathon is this weekend as we're talking. But yeah, it has a special place in my heart for sure. And if you like my husband does not really love Mickey as much as I do, but I have convinced him to come a bunch of times. So he probably would not pick a Run Disney Race as his favorite, but they're super fun.
People, are there races in Europe? I mean, that may seem naive, but
yeah.
That's cool.
Yeah.
And
yeah.
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, yeah. I think I probably a close second, or perhaps, I don't know, a tie for first. I would say really that Monterey race was probably my favorite, the Monterey Half Marathon.
Fabulous. And you sort of alluded to having music at different intervals. Are you off music totally now? Or tell us, do you have any playlists we could share? Or tell us what's happening music-wise for you.
Usually when I'm outside, I don't run with any music. And so if I'm on the treadmill, which is not very much, but really this week it's been so cold and we had snow here. So I did go on the treadmill. I do have like a mixed playlist, and there's a lot of Bruce Springsteen on there. I am happy to share the playlist.
My brother and his wife, who live in Vermont, they love Bruce Springsteen. They're huge fans, so they'll love to hear this. Well,
there's a lot of Disney music too.
Yeah, hey, it sounds very joyful, to be perfectly honest. So I understand if the listener wanted to connect with you, you have a free 4-week Couch to Confidence training program. Where can they find that? Where is that available for them to check out?
Yeah, probably the easiest place is on the website. It's mindful-marathon.com. And I think there's a pop-up that you can just click and enter your email and it'll come to your inbox. Or on social media, you can find me too. I tend to hang out mostly on Instagram.
Awesome. We love Instagram. Lots happening there. So tell us any other closing thoughts. I'm just so grateful we've had this time. Is there any final reflections you'd like to share? We've had a wide range of discussions today.
Yeah, I didn't know that about your dad, and I think it's interesting that we have both lost our dads, and that I ran that marathon in 2018, and I think they would both be smiling if they are listening now.
Yes, and my dad actually did pass in 2018, so there's a lot of links there that are really beautiful, and I think running is such a beautiful way. And in my own process of healing, I'm slowly making my way back to movement. And this has been a really inspiring, non-judgmental, non-shaming conversation, because I want to just reflect back to you. I'm competitive. I'm type A. And I was very athletic, and I'm really annoyed at my body. And that's the easiest way to say it. I could say so much more, but I'm often like, why can't we do what we could used to do? And this constant that's my inner critic, but my compassionate self, which inevitably I think arises with mindfulness, says, thank goodness the body's still carrying you. Think of all the other things that could have been the outcomes. And the body's doing its very best with circumstances that were a bit out of our control. And so I think it's so beautiful how you've woven your medical journey, your personal journey, your own inner healing, and this mentoring, and now supporting others through the coaching work. I am absolutely delighted to have had this time with you today. And I would love to have you back to talk nutrition and food if you do that deep dive and want to kind of geek out on it a little bit. I'm always learning, of course, but I want to thank you, Dr. Quirk, really for joining us. And my listeners sometimes ask, I want this as my pediatrician. Are you taking new patients? And where do you practice?
Yeah, I practice in West Philadelphia at an outpatient practice there. And yes, we do take new patients there. So if you're in the Philadelphia area and you don't mind the traffic getting into West Philly, we are there for you.
Awesome. Okay. So they can just look up your name and find you that way. Perfect.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me. It was a pleasure to talk to you and to your listeners.